Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, we are back for part 2 of reading the Cassie lawsuit against Diddy. I think a lot of this will be cross-referenced by others. People tend to stick to the same perverted ways from one victim to the next. So we're not going to linger. We're going to jump right back in. The next section, Ms. Ventura tries to escape Mr. Combs' abuse. Anytime she tried to create distance between her and Mr. Combs, he used his networks to find her and convince her to return to his abuse. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs sent his employees to lure Ms. Ventura back. In 2011, during a rough patch in Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura's relationship, Ms. Ventura had a brief relationship with musician Kid Cudi. When Mr. Combs returned from a trip, he demanded another FO of Ms. Ventura. During this FO, Mr. Combs found Ms. Ventura's phone and found emails between her and Kid Cudi. Mr. Combs became enraged and proceeded to take a manual corkscrew between his fingers and lunged at Ms. Ventura. Ms. Ventura ran to stay at Kid Cudi's home to escape Mr. Combs' wrath. Soon thereafter, one of Mr. Combs' staff members told Ms. Ventura that she needed to just talk to Mr. Combs, even though Mr. Combs was enraged. Feeling like she could not escape Mr. Combs and his network of enforcers, Ms. Ventura returned to Mr. Combs. He hit her several times and then kicked her in the back as she tried to run out the door. She went to her parents' home in Connecticut, where her mother took pictures of the bruises Mr. Combs had left on Ms. Ventura's body. In February 2012, during a Paris Fashion Week, Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car, and he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. Ms. Ventura was terrified as she began to fully comprehend what Mr. Combs was both willing and able to do to those he believed had slighted him. In 2015, Ms. Ventura spoke to a popular music manager at an after-party in a hotel suite in Las Vegas. Mr. Combs saw her speaking to this manager and sternly told her to step into the bedroom adjoining the suite. In the bedroom, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura severely. She ran from corner to corner of the room, trying to avoid Mr. Combs' beating and kicking. When she tried to lock herself in the bathroom, he pushed through and punched and kicked her while she curled up under the toilet. Her screams were drowned out by the loud music playing in the outside area of the hotel suite. When Mr. Combs' head of security and assistant saw Ms. Ventura after the assault, they began to cry. Ms. Ventura had 2 black eyes, a busted and bruised lip, and a huge welt on her forehead. Upon seeing the results of his vicious attack, Mr. Combs immediately took steps to conceal his wrongdoing. He forced Ms. Ventura to stay at his home in Holmby Hills along with one of his sons. While there, Mr. Combs FaceTimed Ms. Ventura and stated, "You gotta go up and put more makeup on. My son can't see you like that." She did put makeup on per Mr. Combs' demands. Ms. Ventura felt she had no choice but to obey her abuser. Even though security guards, assistants, and friends saw the situation she was in, no one dared to help her or speak up on her behalf. She therefore had no choice but to remain subservient. Later, in 2015, while shooting a movie in Cape Town, South Africa, Ms. Ventura began a flirtatious relationship with an actor. She spent New Year's Eve with this actor, but Mr. Combs soon found out. Mr. Combs called the actor and threatened him. The actor proceeded to call Ms. Ventura and tell her, "You really need to call Mr. Combs." In or around March 2016, during an FO at the Intercontinental Hotel in Century City, Los Angeles, Mr. Combs became extremely intoxicated and punched Ms. Ventura in the face, giving her a black eye. After he fell asleep, Ms. Ventura tried to leave the hotel room, but as she exited, Mr. Combs awoke and began screaming at Ms. Ventura. He followed her into the hallway of the hotel while yelling at her. He grabbed her and then took glass vases in the hallway and threw them at her, causing glass to crash around them as she ran to the elevator to escape. She managed to get into the elevator, and when she got to the lobby, quickly took a cab to her apartment. Upon realizing that her running away would cause Mr. Combs to be even angrier with her and completely stuck in his vicious cycle of abuse, Ms. Ventura returned to the hotel with the intention of apologizing for running away from her abuser. When she returned, hotel security staff urged her to get back into a cab and go to her apartment, suggesting that they had seen the security footage showing Mr. Combs beating Ms. Ventura and throwing glass at her in the hotel hallway. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs paid the Intercontinental Century City $50,000 for the hallway security footage from that evening. After this, Ms. Ventura left her home in Comstock and went to hide away at a friend's home in Florida. James Cruz, president of Bad Boy Management, tracked Ms. Ventura down and told her that her single would not be released if she did not answer Mr. Combs' phone calls. A woman who worked at Sony Music reached out to her with a similar ultimatum concerning her record. Incredibly, Mr. Combs even convinced one of his attorneys to call Ms. Ventura at this time. This lawyer told Ms. Ventura, "It's in your best interest to call Mr. Combs back." Each time Ms. Ventura tried to run away, Mr. Combs and his powerful network would force her back to him. Mr. Combs' tight hold over her life had irreparably damaged her friendships. Around 2018, when Ms. Ventura was with her friend Carrie Morgan in her house, Mr. Combs used his key to Ms. Ventura's house and came in unannounced. He and Ms. Morgan had an altercation, during which Mr. Combs threw a hanger at Ms. Morgan. Upon information and belief, the incident resulted in a settlement between Mr. Combs and Ms. Morgan, and Ms. Ventura ended up paying Ms. Morgan additional funds in an attempt to resolve the dispute between her close friend and her abusive and controlling boyfriend. The relationship between Ms. Ventura and Ms. Morgan has been strained since this time. Seeing the extreme measures Mr. Combs took to keep a tight hold on Ms. Ventura and isolate her from her support network, and having experienced the repercussions of rejecting his demands, Ms. Ventura felt that saying no to Mr. Combs would cost her something: her family, her friends, her career, or even her life. The next section, Mr. Combs sexually assaults Ms. Ventura. By 2017 and 18, Ms. Ventura became desperate to leave Mr. Combs and his abuse of her. She recognized that if she stayed with him, she would never be able to have a successful career or ever be physically and mentally safe. She therefore became determined to completely break away from Mr. Combs and his cycle of abuse, and made a concerted effort to avoid him. In September 2018, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner at an Italian restaurant in Malibu, California, for what she believed would be a discussion about concluding their relationship for good. After dinner, Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura returned to Ms. Ventura's home, which was paid for by Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs forced himself into her apartment and tried to kiss Ms. Ventura. She told him to stop and attempted to push him away. They go on to say that he sexually assaulted her. I'm not going to get into the specifics. Shortly thereafter, Ms. Ventura took steps to completely separate from her longtime abuser, including by leaving the home that he paid for and returning the car he purchased for her. Despite moving away, Ms. Ventura's address was posted online in early 2019, leading to fears for her safety. Ms. Ventura, who was under immense distress during the months after Mr. Combs sexually assaulted her, took all steps to remove herself from her abuser's ambit, including by entering into contracts to end her record deal with Bad Boy Entertainment. The next section, Mr. Combs's sexual and physical abuse of Ms. Ventura has caused her lifelong harm. As a result of the immense trauma Ms. Ventura endured for over a decade with Mr. Combs, she has suffered and continues to suffer from immense emotional distress. Following her escape from the cycle of abuse and sex trafficking she endured, she struggled with the physical and mental manifestations of her trauma. The birth of her 2 children, however, allowed her a new lease on life and gave her purpose. She credits her children with saving her from the trauma that had consumed over a decade of her life. Except for the months when she was pregnant with her children, Ms. Ventura struggled with her addictions to drugs and alcohol, addictions that were established and fueled by Mr. Combs. She turned to substances to drown out the memories of her abuse. Without being intoxicated, she suffered from horrific nightmares of the forced acts that Mr. Combs demanded she participate in during the regularly scheduled FOs and of the physical beatings that she endured throughout her relationship. She had difficulty eating or sleeping, and her relationships with her family suffered. During this time, she frequently had thoughts of ending her life. To rebuild her life and career, Ms. Ventura needed to completely reinvent herself. She checked herself into inpatient treatment at a rehabilitation center where she first confronted the extent of the trauma she lives with. She has required intensive therapy and other medical care to recover from Mr. Combs's abuse, and she will forever live with the physical and psychological repercussions of the over a decade of violence, fear, and exploitation she endured. Although Ms. Ventura was unable to speak up against the years of abuse she endured at the hands of Mr. Combs, she has since been able to rebuild her life and confront her trauma. Thanks to the passage of New York's Adult Survivors Act and California's Sexual Abuse Accountability and Cover-Up Act, she is now ready and able to also confront her abuser and to hold him and those who enabled his abuse accountable for their actions. They go on and do several cause of actions, and then we'll just mention the other states that are really just repetitive of what we're about to read. It says plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. This one is U.S. law. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking and is therefore entitled to bring a civil action. The defendant's acts and omissions taken separately and or together as outlined above constitute a violation of U.S. law. Specifically, defendant Sean Combs perpetrated sex trafficking of Ms. Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced sexual acts in multiple jurisdictions, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs's venture by holding Ms. Ventura, an artist signed with defendant Bad Boy Records, and otherwise employed by other defendant Doe corporations, captive to Mr. Combs's demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendants participated in and facilitated the harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of sex induced by force, fraud, or coercion. We've seen that same language, by the way, in the indictment that he's currently in jail for. The defendant corporations have financially and otherwise benefited as a result of these acts and omissions by keeping Mr. Combs, the explosive owner of the defendant corporations, satisfied. They benefited from facilitating his behavior to the extent it kept the music mogul happy and kept Ms. Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs, defendant Combs, and defendants Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10 formed a venture given that they constituted a group of 2 or more individuals associated in fact, whether or not a legal entity. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful conduct, as alleged here and above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Plaintiff also seeks reasonable attorney fees. They go on and cite New York and California. What's listed as the 4th cause of action is battery and sexual battery under New York law against defendant Sean Combs. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. In performing the conduct described above, defendant committed a battery against plaintiff because he intentionally engaged in unlawful, intentional, and offensive touching or application of force to plaintiff's person. The conduct of Mr. Combs described above was willful and malicious. At all relevant times, Mr. Combs acted with conscious disregard for plaintiff's rights and feelings, acted with the knowledge of or with reckless disregard for the fact that his conduct was certain to cause injury and or humiliation to plaintiff, and intended to cause fear, physical injury, and or pain and suffering to plaintiff. By virtue of the foregoing, plaintiff is entitled to recover punitive damages from Mr. Combs according to proof at trial. They go on to say this action is timely because it falls within law and is brought during the 1-year time period set forth in that section. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts and or omissions for physical, psychological, and other injuries suffered as a result of conduct that would constitute sexual offenses defined in New York law. And such acts or omissions were committed against Ms. Ventura when she was over 18 years of age. The action also falls within California's adult sexual abuse law and is brought during the 3-year time period set forth in that action. They go on to the 5th cause of action, sexual assault pursuant to the California Sexual Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act against all defendants. She repeats the allegations that we have talked about. Defendant Mr. Combs subjected plaintiff to sexual abuse, sexual battery, sexual assault, and forcible acts as defined in California law. In doing so, he intended to and did cause harm and sexually offensive contact with their person and place them in imminent apprehension of such contact. Defendant corporations were entities engaged in a cover-up as defined in California Civil Code because defendant corporations took concerted efforts to hide evidence relating to the above described sexual assaults that incentivized individuals to remain silent or prevented information pertaining to the sexual assaults from becoming public. So after this, they just go through cause of actions that are specific to each state the crimes took place in. And we won't go through them because they are repetitive. And then the prayer for relief. Wherefore, plaintiff prays judgment to be entered in her favor against defendants and each of them as follows. For a money judgment to reflect lost wages, earnings, and all other sums of money, together with interest on these amounts according to proof. For a money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress according to proof. For attorney fees and cost, for pre-judgment and post-judgment interest, and for such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. So that is her lawsuit in full. He settled that the next day. He knew this was bad news for him if it became public, and it became public, and a lot more became public, and we're just getting started. It's really disgusting to me. You have so many people that were influenced by his power and his money to cover up what was done to Cassie over the course of 10 years. For me, I'd be happy to see all of them in prison right alongside where Diddy's probably headed. But we'll see what happens with this. I still think other people will be arrested. I think a lot of people are going to take deals in exchange for their testimony because they really want Diddy. They want this to be a rock solid case with little to no doubt for this jury and put him away. I think people that were very intimately involved in the cover up and not reporting may end up and be indicted. We'll just have to wait and see. But I wanted to read this, like I said in the beginning of the first episode, because this is a sneak peek at some of the allegations I think that we're going to see come out in trial. I think this gives a good insight into the person that Diddy is and what he's capable of. And we have a lot of people coming forward saying that they are victims. We know there is a lot of digital evidence in this case already. So this is just a preview. And my heart goes out to Cassie because having to endure this for so long, or even once, but not to mention 10 years, we will keep up on anything new with the case. In the meantime, we are done for the day. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We will see you soon.